morning, everybody. My name is Ben, and I am doing my very first DamCam session remotely. So you'll have to forgive us if there are one or two teething problems this morning. But I'm very excited to be back and helping out on the DamCam feeds this morning for Escape to Nature. And we've started the morning with some lovely views from the Kikuyu waterhole in Etosha out in Namibia of some zebras having a drink and also a few springbok by the look of it meandering past around. But remember, this is a live and interactive experience. It's great to be here. It's great to be providing all of you with these wonderful pictures. And as always, we invite any questions or comments that you may have regards to anything that we're seeing on the camera feeds. Of course, we have got the Kikuyu feed and also the Juma feed as well. If you guys see anything or have any questions about what we're seeing, or anything at all for that matter, then please just do let us know. And you can do that by downloading our app and registering. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to click the subscribe button so that we can keep you up to date of all the awesome things that we can offer you and news. But this is very exciting for me. I've never actually done a DamCam session before, so I have to sort of get used to the controls. So you'll have to forgive me if it sort of jerks around a little bit, or we end up looking at some sand or some rocks for a while. But yeah, what a great way to start. Always seems to be busy at this waterhole, but of course Namibia is a very dry and arid country. And these waterholes are little oases that attract a multitude of animals. I have seen some wildebeest this morning, plenty of springbok, lots and lots of zebras around. We've had the occasional Egyptian goose, and I did see a little pied crow flit across the screen a little bit earlier. Well, thank you, Jules. I am very excited to be here as well. So it's a new experience for me. It's a bit strange sitting in a room looking at wildlife and talking about up close and personal to it. So this is a new experience for me. Oh, there's a little bird in the water. What have we got there? Looks like a grebe or something. Right, it's going to be my first effort of moving the camera around. The fact that it's just ducked under the water there suggests it's possibly a little grebe. That is their normal hunting strategy. They move around along the water and then they dive down sometimes for a few seconds at a time. Let's have a look, see if my zoom functions work. Look at the little baby zebra as well, how cute. Our grebe is either drowned or more likely is swimming around under the water and they might pop up somewhere else on the dam. No, I haven't seen him come up. Thank you, Lenny. It is lovely to be back, say, in a slightly different manner that I am used to. But wildlife is wildlife. And if I can't be out driving around and experiencing it myself, then I suppose this is the next best thing. So I'm kind of in your guys' shoes today, watching remote pictures instead of actually seeing it in person. I saw it was a great sunrise safari this morning. Obviously, I've been busy trying to make sure all of this is working properly, but I saw that Steve had the Queen of Juma herself, Lamba, and Marips was lounging the big Jackleberry, which I actually consider Columba's Jackleberry for my time in Juma. And hopefully we'll have some great sightings for you today as well. Of course, we'll be monitoring the cameras as best as we can. What I'm really hoping to see more than anything else is a black rhino come down, but that normally does happen towards late afternoon. So I think we'll be very fortunate for that to happen whilst I am here. We've got some impalas that have come down for a drink. Let's see if I can zoom in and have a look at the impalas. Langalaba, yes, I have, but strangely never to Etosha, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine. I've spent quite a lot of time down in the sort of southwestern area around Sossusvlei and those areas because of my astronomy work that I do. That is one of the best places in the world because of the very, very dark skies and the strict regulations within the Namib Naukluft Reserve in terms of light pollution, or to ensure that those skies remain pristine. They are Portal 1 skies, which is the darkest skies you can find. And also because it's a desert environment, it's very dry. And for what I do with astrophotography and things, you want very unhumid conditions, because the more water vapor there is in the atmosphere, the more distortion is potentially applied to that starlight or the light from nebulosities and things coming through the atmosphere. So I do go to the southwest quite regularly, and I have also spent some time up in Damaraland, which is a little bit further west of Etosha, but not too far off in terms of latitude, maybe slightly south of it. And did see some lions and elephants and black rhinos and things in that area. Incredible landscape. But I've never actually been to Etosha. Problem is, Namibia, like South Africa, is a huge country. And it's well, you need to take a serious 4x4 to get most places, and you have to carry a lot of stuff with you because you may not find anywhere like a petrol station or a shop. So it's an incredible country, but one has to be fairly self-sufficient whilst you're out there. But it's still on the list to get to Etosha one day, certainly. Obviously, so nice to see these white colours. Damaraland is more of a desert, sandy and rocky habitat, where it's lacking all the calcrete and the calcium that we find in the soils and the rocks around Etosha, which we can see in those pictures. But nice to see some impalas. I'm surprised to see impalas. We've had, say, plenty of springboks coming through this morning, but everybody taking an opportunity to have a drink as and where they can. Of course, impalas are slightly more, well, a lot more water dependent than springboks, because springbok are specialists of this sort of arid, dry environment, and there have been cases where springboks can go. Oh, there's a springbok on the right. Can go their entire life without actually having to have a drink of water. They're able to extract sufficient moisture from what they are eating or browsing. They eat roots and tubers and flowers and plants, and they have an incredibly efficient digestive system specifically adapted for these dry environments. Loads of springboks coming down. Well, Kathy Lee, thank you very much. I hope that is the case. Of course, because I haven't spent as much time out in Namibia, obviously I've seen many springboks, but we don't get springboks in the Lowveld and the Kruger area, which is where I spend most of my time. So it's actually going to be quite fun for me to find out some new information, and maybe see some things that I'm not used to seeing. But that's the beauty of being able to move around and try these different locations. Look at these springboks, they're having a proper paddle. Having said they're not water dependent, if there is water there, they will, of course, make use of it. They're very trusting. You'd never see an impala wading out into the water like that because of fear of crocodiles and things. But out there, as far as I know, there are no crocs in that area of Namibia, certainly, because there isn't enough water to keep a stable ocean. So the springboks obviously don't have to worry about those things floating around underneath the water that they cannot see. And I sense today is going to be a constant stream of animals coming down for a drink. But yeah, I don't think I've ever seen impalas wade into the water up to their bellies like this. Look at those beautiful markings on these springbok coming through in the foreground. They are really, really pretty things, actually. I've seen them in Madikwe. There's a small population in Madikwe, and certainly in parts of western South Africa. But yeah, no springboks, traditionally anyway, unless they've been introduced in the eastern side. You normally get either impala or springbok. It's rare to actually have both of them together because they kind of fulfill the same ecological niche. Impala is generally restricted more to the eastern side of the country, springbok to the west. Oops, trouble having a run. Now I'm going to have to. This is the weird thing for me. I see springboks running. Now I need to zoom out and find out why are they running. What's going on? Everybody's vacated the area. Let's see if there's a reason for that. Slowly pan to the left. They seem to run from left to right. Now I know with here, particularly with these rocks and things, it can be quite difficult to pick out smaller animals against that background. If anybody does see anything unusual, you must let me know. What's that in the water? Oh, we suddenly zoomed in more than I'd intended there. Okay, well, I have found an Egyptian goose, but I don't think that's what scared the springbok. A couple of Egyptian geese enjoying the shallows. Well, this is the area that the springboks were jogging away from, but I see no obvious reasons why that was the case. I thought perhaps if we were lucky, we'd find a predator lying in the shade of the tree here, but alas not. Of course, nice and open over here as well. Often what you find in my experience, certainly with impalas, is if the waterhole is in a fairly heavily vegetated area, they will spend quite a lot of time checking the shadows just to ensure that there is nothing waiting for them because they are in a vulnerable position when they come down and have a drink. They're not paying so much attention, their heads are down. And you'll often find that they will even migrate to the other side of the waterhole purely to ensure that the wind is blowing in their direction, so that even if they can't see clearly, then perhaps they will pick up the scent of a prowling predator. Lovely to see such a constant progression of animals coming down for a drink. Of course, in the Kruger area, we support a bigger diversity in terms of species, but not in big numbers, just because of the habitat. Out here, I think we'll probably see less in terms of different species coming down, but in bigger numbers because of the water stress of such a dry and arid climate. I think I'd also be paddling in the water if I could. Looks like our little grebe is back over there, sitting around on the water surface. Looks like some zebras right in the background there, but I don't want to keep zooming in and moving the camera around too much in case it's a little disruptive for you guys watching, especially until I get a better hang of the controls. But I have seen some zebra, some blue wildebeest, some impala and springbok already this morning, and a few birds here and there. Difficult to identify birds through a camera feed though, as opposed to being in person with binoculars. But I shall certainly be trying to keep a list and see what I see in this area. Difficult, of course, birding out in Namibia. There's just, again, little like I was saying with the mammal species, not quite the diversity in terms of birds, and a lot of what we lovingly call LBJs, those little brown jobs, a lot of larks and pipits. Starbuck, never say never, but I have never ever heard of that. The only antelope species that I am aware of that does have a slight taste for meat is the grey Dacre, or common Dacre as it's also known, which we see quite regularly in Juma and other areas. It is thought that a very small percentage, perhaps sort of 5 or 7% of their diet, does involve meat and protein. Um, I don't know about ever feeding on an old carcass because that's a little bit different. But they have been recorded eating small mammals, small birds, insects, and there are rumors that one or two may have been seen feeding on a carcass, which is highly unusual for an antelope, just because of the digestive processes they've got. The Dacre being a ruminant, of course, four-chambered stomachs aren't really designed to deal with protein. If you look at a predator's stomach, like a lion or a leopard, that's similar to ours, actually. It's what we call a monogastric stomach, one stomach. Because, and you don't need such a complicated digestive system because meat is very protein rich. So it's much easier to extract energy from it. If you are a vegetarian and you're eating grass and leaves and things and tubers and roots and bulbs, then you need to have, and nature has adapted a way of extracting maximum energy from a relatively poor protein rich diet. Okay, let's have a scan along the other side and see what we've got. Some more springbok. I'm hoping we might see some gemsbok. Is that possibly a gemsbok coming down at the back there? Looks like it might be. Difficult to see from here. Yes, it is. I thought I could see those long, straight horns. Oh, this one seems to have broken a horn. Probably lost in a little exchange with another individual. I'm guessing this is a male. It's a bit more difficult to sex these animals because both species have horns in both springbok and gemsbok or oryx. The fact that it's got a broken horn and the fact that it's on its own leads me to assume that this is a boy. Also, those beautiful facial markings. They're actually for me, these are one of the prettiest antelopes we have. They're probably my favorite antelope. They're such beautiful things, and those horns are so impressive. Where are you going, little gemsbok? Also very water independent. You see, there's an interesting, this sort of open patch here. It suggests that maybe I can see some little mounds there. So maybe this is a territorial ground for a wildebeest. Interesting that the gemsbok has stopped there. Probably not to have a sniff, because that gemsbok will lack the ability to interpret the information left behind by a wildebeest, if that is who has created it. Potentially, maybe even eating some soil that's been exposed there, doing what we call geophagia, eating the soil to get vitamins and more minerals, more specifically. Everything hard to come by in such a difficult environment out there, and you take the opportunity where you can. Jerome, yes, I would very much think so. Because there are always battles between boys. Boys will always fight over girls. That is fairly standard, regardless of the species. So more likely that is the case. Trying to see if we can sex it. I think I see a little bump on his underside there, which would suggest that it is a male. And especially with those long, thin horns, I think that they are susceptible to breakages. And actually, one of the ways you can sex a gemsbok is by looking at the horns. Generally speaking, females have longer, thinner horns, and males have more sturdy horns, particularly towards the base, in order to hopefully this from happening, these breakages. But at a glance, it is quite difficult to tell. but I think they have the most beautiful facial markings. It's a rather beautiful creature, actually. Lovely streamlined. Its fur looks to be in good condition from what I can see here. And he now, with only having one horn, is potentially a lethal adversary. Because normally they would lock horns, twist their necks slightly, and then push against one another as more of a test of strength. Obviously, that's going to be a lot more difficult for an opponent now. And what he's got there is a vicious-looking stabbing weapon, basically. Hasn't had a drink yet. Just getting a lay of the land by the look of it. Let him have a drink. Probably just being classically cautious, as most animals are. Particularly because he's on his own. The springbok perhaps are a little bit more relaxed because there are lots of them. So they trust the fact that there are many eyes on the lookout. When you're an isolated individual like that, there is potentially far more danger that you might be picked off by something whilst having a drink. Yeah, thought better of it. Oh, have a look at these birds here. Okay, I'm going to keep exploring the vistas here from Pukekohe. We'll also be keeping an eye on the Djuma webcam, of course, the dam cam. But for now, let's send you over to Ralph in Kariega so he can say good morning.
Hello everybody and welcome to Escape to Nature, where I'm coming to you live from the Kariega Game Reserve in the Eastern Cape. And I tell you what, we've had some pretty inclement weather over the last few days. There's been lots of rain, but yesterday and this morning the westerly wind is really playing havoc. So the animals are generally going on the leeward side, on the eastern side of the thickets of the bushes, and they're just generally staying out of this very strong and chilly wind. Now, my name is Ralph Kirsten, and I do have lots of animals in my view, but I'm just enjoying watching these piggies truffle here in the open plain next to or near to the Scotia Dam. But this is on the eastern side of the reserve itself. And whenever I see pigs doing this, especially this adult here, you'll see it is sticking its nose into the ground and throwing up the soil. And it looks like it's going for roots and bulbs. It always makes me think of the truffling that they actually do in Europe in search of the highly prized black truffles. And they use pigs, or they used to use pigs, because of their highly acute sense of smell to find the truffles. So the pigs used to go out and sniff them out in the forests and then dig them up. But they actually found that the pigs were eating all the truffles. So now in more modern times they actually use dogs, because the dogs don't eat the truffles. Now, not that we have any of those particular European truffles here, but still fun to watch the warthogs as they go about their feeding. A couple of little piglets there. And I'm glad to hear that Ben's on the dam cams in one of my favorite places in the world, in Etosha National Park at the Okukuyu waterhole. I've spent many hours at that particular waterhole, and yeah, get to know the little characters. And you've got to keep an eye out for that Umbika Pride. It's 20 plus strong lions that do like to come down, especially at this time of the year when it starts to get a little bit more dry. And then they start to come up from the Umbika waterhole, which is a natural spring. They start moving up towards the Okukuyu waterhole, and they spend more time there around this time of the year. So you've got to look behind those big logs that are present near to the waterhole, because you often may see a hiding lioness. I've witnessed quite a few hunts right there. And then the jackals that come throughout the day that hunt doves and Namakwa sandgrass that come down to drink and soak their feathers before they move off and take the water to the chicks. And then they often lie in the elephant dung, very well camouflaged on that yellow brick road on the right hand side. There's one particular spot that is like a bed for the jackals, and they often are curled up in there, and you need to look very closely because they are hidden. And there's a pair of Verreaux's eagle owls that like to nest in that camel thorn tree just off to the left of the waterhole. If you're lucky, they might come down in the early morning or late afternoon to drink, standing next to the springbok. But here in Kariega, just enjoying this chilly weather. Now that we've just had a look at that warthog and its little piglets. So Hilda, no, we only have this one species of warthog. The closest that we do get to it, and we have quite a lot here in these particular parts, is the bush pig. It's also part of the Suidae family pigs, but they don't sort of come out during the day as much as warthogs. They're almost exclusively nocturnal. So it's only the two in the family of pigs. And here we've got the whole breeding herd of buffalo. They've been up in the thickets for the last few days, so it's nice that they've come out and exposing themselves, that we can see them. It's been a while, a few days at least. I actually saw some of their dung up near the gate coming into the main lodge. And this is one of the only places in South Africa where you get naturally born disease-free buffalo. It's that bovine tuberculosis that is the most or the biggest problem with buffalo, because they are carriers of the disease and they pass it on to livestock. But here they are resistant to it, and it's the Addo genetic line that is most important. Lots of little calves there as well.
Wild Earth's mission is an expensive one, but we know that our live experience is important to so many people that cannot afford to pay for it. We have added a donate button to our website. By donating, you are directly helping us share our free nature experiences with the world. We want Wild Earth to reach children, budding conservationists, and the less fortunate. A little money goes a long way. You can make a difference to someone today.
So this particular breeding herd of buffalo, you can also notice, well, I've noticed particularly with them, that they're a lot more relaxed than you might find in the Kruger National Park, for instance, because there's no lions on this side of the reserve, so they do spend more time lying around and relaxed in the processes of digesting their food, etc. They lie around a lot, which you won't find, for instance, as much in the Kruger National Park, where there's a lot of lions that are following them, hunting them. They're a little bit more on their toes. And here you can see, as a result of a lack of predator threat, they generally are more of a relaxed unit as well. Not so much in formation, not so much in defensive mode, more just enjoying themselves and not worrying about the threat of predators. Buffalo don't really have to worry about anything except lions. They don't really have any other natural predators. They're too big, they're too tough, and they're too gnarly. Humans and lions. I don't know of any reports of leopard taking out buffalo. I have seen and heard of spotted hyena. So that is sort of another one, but not as big a threat as lions. So if we could say that, yeah, not only lions, but also spotted hyena, they do hunt buffalo. And it's normally when there's an old bull that's been separated from the herd, or youngsters, etc., that spotted hyena would take on. But other than that, they wouldn't really hunt them as a unit. Not that I've heard of, anyway. So with there being quite a lot of wind as well, coming in from the southwest, at the moment it is a chilly wind because of this cold front. Normally it can, if it comes in from the northwest over the Karoo, then we do have a hot wind coming in from that side. But this is as a result of this cold front that's come up from the Cape and Cape Town, and so it's rather chilly. So I won't be pushing these buffalo down towards the water and the wallowing sites. I doubt it, not on a day like this. So Ryan, yeah, the antelope would have a bigger threat of predators here, definitely, especially the smaller antelope, because on this side of the reserve there will be brown hyena. There's mainly caracal and jackals. Those are the most prevalent predators on this side. On the western side there are lions and hyenas as well, and they're also going to be releasing cheetah in the next week or so, so they'll have to worry about them on that side. On this side, the smaller antelope do get taken out quite regularly by those little predators. But you can imagine a caracal, it doesn't take on anything bigger than, let's say, an impala, but it wouldn't even take on an adult impala. It would take out more the little lambs, and you can very often, we've often found carcasses, and you can see very quickly that it was a caracal, obviously because there's tracks next to it, but they open up the carcass very quickly from the rear end. They open up the belly and they go straight for the very rich organs, such as the liver, the kidney, the heart and the lungs, but the liver and kidney most important, and then they normally disappear. It's quite a small cat, and wouldn't be able to eat too much. It's not quite like a cheetah where they can gorge themselves and swallow in 500 gram pieces of meat at a time. And so they do also eat as quickly as possible, and mainly going for those organs, the very rich protein-wise meats that they can get out of it as quickly as possible and then disappear. I've seen jackals in the Etosha National Park hunting springbok next to the waterholes, and actually hunting in groups, in packs, because we know that they're monogamous and normally very territorial as well, but when they band together and with one common goal of taking down a springbok, they can be actually quite ferocious. And I've seen on numerous occasions them taking down springbok next to the waterholes itself. As they come down to drink, the jackals are normally trotting around. They start to ignore them and not take them as a threat. And then one of them just grabs onto the springbok and it makes a noise. And the other jackals just race in. And it becomes a bit like a wild dog show where everybody just starts ripping in different directions, so that it's quite not a very nice sighting to watch, because you do feel sorry for the springbok. They literally rip it apart, but not with the same power as the wild dogs would, and so it takes a bit longer for the animal to actually die. So it's quite a sorry sight. But then when you see 15 to 20 jackals ravenous and feeding on this carcass, the meat starts disappearing in all different directions, and they start chasing each other, and that's when they become territorial once again, once the animal is actually opened up and then there's food available. But we often also do see when the jackals take down a prey like that, it makes a lot of noise, so it does attract the likes of spotted hyena and lions, who then scavenge, surprise, surprise, off a jackal. And that is amazing to watch, when a little sort of insignificant predator such as a jackal gets scavenged upon by spotted hyena and lions. It's actually incredible. But they're ever the opportunists, and if the jackals have taken something down or busy in the process, they've grabbed it and it makes some noise, well, why wouldn't you? It's a free meal. So the lions and hyenas take advantage in those specific instances. But there won't be any jackals taking down buffalo. That I'm certain. See, there's a little calf there. Oh, little one. And it's all too much for him. He's gone for a sleep under mum. Not that he needs any shade today. So you can see that one on the left, in the middle left, behind that female where the baby's gone down. That one is probably over a year old. You can see the horns are still very straight. So it is still young, but it's not as young as that little one that's just gone down for a snooze, or at least a rest up while mummy's grazing and ruminating. A couple of the birds still calling this morning regardless of the wind. Southern boobos and black-headed orioles. Linda, there's been a few difficult hunts that I've watched. In the Masai Mara, I watched spotted hyena taking down a topi. And disclaimer, it's not very nice even to speak of. With hyenas, wild dogs, jackals, they don't really kill the animal and go for the throat like you would have with cheetah, lions, leopards. So there is a period of where the animal is busy, being eaten alive. And I watched in the Masai Mara with the spotted hyenas that chased down a topi. They must have been chasing it for quite a long time, because the topi was totally exhausted, eventually just stood, and then the hyenas got onto it, and they literally ate it alive, that there was only half of it. The front quarter was still, the animal was still trying to walk forward, while there was only half of it left. which was pretty much up to the ribs, and it was still trying to walk while there was only half of it there. So that was quite difficult for me to watch, just in that particular instance. And then I've watched quite a difficult one. It was extremely powerful and absorbing and amazing at the Okukuyo waterhole, where a female lion came down to drink, but it was early afternoon. It was quite hot. It was, when I say quite hot for Etosha, that's talking lower 40s. But it's a dry heat, so you don't have that humidity that you may have in the low veld. So it's still, I find, bearable, but very hot. So female lion of the Umbika Pride wanted to come down for a drink, and there were some animals drinking at the waterhole, including some oryx and quite a big herd of springbok. And she went down behind the waterhole to the left. There's quite a lot of the camel thorn trees that have been lying there for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but they do provide quite good cover for the predators that do come down. And she came down for a drink, but obviously with there being animals next to the waterhole, ever the optimists, she went down behind one of those logs, and she just stayed there. The wind was blowing in her favor, it was in her face, but it did begin to swirl a little bit, and suddenly the herd of springbok must have caught wind of her, and they all bolted, but in different directions. And there was one female gemsbok or oryx that was drinking just off of the springbok, and with the springbok running off, the oryx also just bolted as a result of it. But she ran straight at the log where the lion was. She jumped out, she grabbed onto that oryx on the hindquarters, and then there was a massive fight that ensued. The oryx was trying to horn the lion, and she stayed right on the back quarter, right on its tail, on its rump, and she started digging her claws in and biting right on the back, obviously trying to get to the spine, and continuously the oryx trying to horn her. This carried on. They went around in circles. The lion threw the oryx down many times, and it just stood up. On one of the occasions when she threw it down, it actually broke off one of the horns of the oryx, and she continued to just bite down on the spine of the oryx, and this continued for about 45 minutes. It was a fight for survival on both parts. Eventually, the lion actually dropped off. She was exhausted, and she started vomiting. You can imagine with that kind of exertion, it was, if you do exert yourself to a point, you can find yourself retching, and that's exactly what she did. But she had done enough damage on the hindquarter of that oryx that it was pretty, I think she had probably severed the spine down the bottom, and so the back legs were caved in. So it was dragging itself with its front quarters and not being able to move very far very quickly. So the female lion, she lay there, she gathered herself again, she caught her breath. Hyenas started to come down, and the lion just simply chased them away, and herded and kept the oryx next to the waterhole. Now this was then going on to two and a half hours into this battle. And then she sort of lay down again. The oryx eventually lay down as well. I think it was exhausted, it was in pain, it couldn't continue either. And this carried on all the way to sunset. Once the sun began to set, that female lion started to roar. And the whole Umbika Pride arrived just as it was getting dark. And they all enjoyed the fruits of that lion's fight and battle with that oryx. Now that was, as I say, powerful and difficult at the same time for me to watch, because at that point after she had immobilized the oryx, it was very sad, because you could see that there was no chance for that oryx or gemsbok to survive. But it was probably the worst and one of the best I've seen at the same time, because then that sheer power of the roar, and within 5 to 10 minutes, 20 plus lions arrived and fed on the fruits of her labor. In the morning, you would never have even known that that oryx existed. It was gone. There wasn't even any blood that you could see. So it was incredible. We just saw this kudu here, just following in behind one of the females. It does look like it's pursuing for mating purposes. There's potential that she's coming into estrus, so then attracts the attention of specifically dominant and mature males. Very, very healthy stock of kudu here. This is prime habitat for them, and it's nice to see them out on the plain as well, enjoying once again this very lush, nutritious grazing. So kudu being browsers, if you look at this picture, we'd have to say that they're grazers, isn't it so? I always say animals can't read, and they don't conform to the boxes that we like to put them in. It was the same as always when I used to, believe that black rhino were exclusively browsers, and yet in the Mara Triangle in Kenya, you would find the black rhino exclusively grazers, enjoying that red oat grass out in the Mara Plains. So it all depends on their habitat and what's available, and they will then take advantage. Generally, yes, but that's what I always say to my guests with the experience that I've gained over the years. Initially, you would say, no, that's not the way that it works, but what I've learned to say subsequently is normally it's like that, but there are always exceptions. And I think that's important as guides. Never say never, because you come around the corner and you'll find animals doing exactly what you said would never happen. It's kind of like the saying where we say that predators don't eat predators. Nonsense. We see leopards eating hyenas, we see hyenas eating lions, we see lions eating jackals. So just with experience and putting yourself out there, and also taking note of other guides' experiences, then we'd say that anything's possible. It also always depends on how hungry you are. And that goes a long way to say that people will do all sorts. JP, yeah, well, I've been guiding for going on 25 years, and yeah, I've spent over 10 years of that in Namibia, and then having worked and freelanced at many different nature reserves, game reserves, national parks, etc. I think I've been very lucky to move around so much and having all these wonderful experiences. So that's the whole idea about Wild Earth, bringing across these experiences and just putting it all on the table, mixing it up with the different guides that we have. Everyone's got different experiences, having worked at different lodges, different countries, different game reserves. So it's awesome to share that. One of my favorite sightings, I must say, was at Djuma, and I'm talking about kudu. It was right behind Galago Pan. I was heading towards the end of one of the shows, and I was looking for anything, and I came across two kudu bulls fighting. And I must say, it's one of the most powerful antelope fights that I've ever seen in my life. It did land up as one of the highlights on one of the shows. And just these two bulls going at it, it was absolutely incredible. The cracking when they hit each other with their horns was so loud, it almost sounded like gunshots. Eventually there wasn't any of them that was wounded or hurt or anything. I think probably the one's pride. But it was just so powerful. It was amazing to watch, and then the one ran off as there was obviously a winner. I've also seen gemsbok and oryx fighting, and sometimes you actually find them with horns through their body, and then you find other oryx with only one horn, and you wonder if, having lost that one horn, it's literally killed another. Anyway, so we speak of the animals here in the east, down on the coast in South Africa. Well, I'm going to head you on over to the west and north to Okukuyu.
That's potentially what happened with that lone gemsbok we saw a little bit earlier with that single horn. As I said, those can be razor sharp. Obviously, as they get a little bit older, those horns will blunten a little bit with use, but a fearsome weapon, certainly. I did some freelance guiding up in Swalu in the northwest province of South Africa, which is sort of desert environment there, and did see a few gemsbok going at it there, and it is mightily impressive. But interesting what Ralph was saying there about the noise from those horns. If any of you have ever witnessed that sort of battle between two antelopes, a serious one, you may know what we are referring to there. But I think for me, the most impressive fight I ever saw was between two buffalo, and I've only ever seen it once. And strangely, I was driving on a public road, and they happened to be close to a fence line, and I'd stopped, and these two males were having a full-on fight there. And I will never forget the noise of those two bosses, the bony substrate of that sort of center of the horn, smashing into one another there. It was like a thunderclap. It was hugely impressive, and I will always remember that. Whenever I see a buffalo, that pops into my head, the sheer power that they can exert, and the inability to feel pain. But I suppose if you've got 6 or 7 inches of bone protecting your brain, that's the whole point of those horns. It's like a helmet and a suit of armor. But yeah, how they didn't knock each other senseless, I don't know through that. But the noise and the power exerted was pretty spectacular. But nice to see such a variety of animals down there in the Eastern Cape. Currently, the Okukuyu waterhole seems to be dominated by zebra. We've had a stream of what has probably been hundreds of zebra over the last 15, 20 minutes or so coming down to quench their thirst. And once again, just like the springbok earlier, they seem to be quite content wading into the water. And why would you not, to make use of that nice cooling elixir? Again, safe in the knowledge that there are no crocodiles to worry about out in this part, of course. But lovely to see so many zebras out and about. I actually don't know whether you would mountain zebra here. I don't want to say never, but I certainly haven't seen any yet. But there are a few milling around out in Namibia. When I was in Sossusvlei, every now and again you'd come across a mountain zebra, a little bit smaller, slightly different stripe patterns. But for me, the easiest thing that you would look for is around the rump. And in the mountain zebra, they almost have like a gridiron pattern sides of their rump. It's very contrasty, stands out. And the other thing, of course, is their underbellies. So in these plain zebras here, of course, formerly the Burchell zebra, the stripes on the side wrap around and almost meet in the middle on the belly themselves. Must be having a little bit of a disagreement there. Whereas the mountain zebra has a plain white stomach. And that, just like most of the sort of more environment or arid suited animals is quite normal to have the white stomachs. We see it in the springboks, we see it in the gemsbok, we've also seen a little bit earlier. And the reason for that is just because of the infrared heat. So the heat from the sun, yes, of course, it bakes you with the UV rays, but of course then it also heats up the land, and then that infrared heat radiates off the land and creates a huge amount of heat. In fact, far more heat you get from the radiative effect of that heat than you do actually from the atmospheric heat, if you like. And you can see that on a day when, if you look down a road or look through an area, and you can see that almost mirage, sort of rising heat off the floor. And that, of course, is the problem that we face from a greenhouse perspective as well, with all those greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. It's that heat that cannot dissipate, and it is that which is slowly causing the general climate of the Earth to warm up and create other problems such as ice cap melting, things that we are very much well aware of at the moment. But with Cape mountain zebra and the other, well, the mountain zebras in general, if you are on rocks, especially out in these areas where there's no shade, can get incredibly hot. I mean, they say you can fry an egg on some of the rocks out here. Some of the granite, when I was down in Namibia there, some of the locals were telling me, reckoned they could get to sort of 80 degrees Celsius. I mean, that is literally hot enough to fry an egg on. You can probably fry an egg on the bonnet of your car. So it's certainly better you having a white stomach so that you can reflect that heat away from you. And we see that even in the low-felt areas as well. If you ever watch an elephant having a bit of a mud bath, you'll see that the majority of the mud, yes, they spray it onto their back and behind their ears to help with their cooling mechanism, but a lot of that mud gets sort of slapped onto the stomach with the trunk, almost like a sort of a plastering motion, again, just to protect that stomach from heating up too much from the radiated temperatures rebounding off the Earth. Let's zoom out a little and see if we can find anything else. We've had quite a few Egyptian geese, but it seems that our little group of zebras has stopped, or little influx of zebras has stopped. You can see them all moving away there in the distance now. Let's see who else we've got. Okay, we've got some springboks here in the foreground. Like Ralph was saying there, it was interesting to listen to Ralph there. He obviously has some good knowledge of this waterhole in particular. I have been checking under these little acacias and things to see whether or not anything might be lying there. But again, more than anything else, I'm watching just the reaction of the other animals here. And if they show any signs of disturbance, we'll obviously have a look in that area. But yeah, lots and lots of adaptations, particularly out in this area of the world, to deal with the excessive heat. Of course, you find a lot of animals out here have a very large body size as well. Two ways: if you've got a small body size, of course, you can hide in holes and things under the ground, like rodents and what have you. But a lot of the antelope species, that large body size actually helps, because your surface area to volume ratio is very much different, and it takes longer for your body to warm up, which is a benefit, certainly. And towards the end of the day, it's quite normal to see gemsbok and other animals making their way up towards the higher points, just to try and capture some of that wind and help cool down their bodies now that they have reached maximum temperature. Of course, what the gemsbok specifically can do, well, not specifically, other animals too, but they can raise their internal body temperature to a point whereby other animals would normally die. Their brain would get too hot and it would cause a stroke. But they can deal with that by using what's called this counter-current heat exchange. So they breathe through their nose, a bit like a dog panting, I suppose, and that venal blood then mixes with the arterial blood going in different directions, and the cooler blood cools that arterial blood on its way through to the brain. And even though the body temperature is high, the brain temperature remains lower. And if you can raise your body temperature to beyond that of the ambient temperature, what it does do is stop you from and of course water loss is a big problem. So if you can stop yourself from sweating, you are not required to replenish said water. Jason, I wouldn't say that the temperature particularly affects the breeding season. Most animals, in terms of when they're going to breed, are going to be taking their cues unconsciously, really, from the length of daylight. So certainly the length of daylight as opposed to the actual heat. More perhaps so would be the availability of moisture. So if there have been good rains, you might see breeding seasons change in order to benefit from that. Because obviously, if you do have an influx of rain, then that means good feeding grounds, good grazing grounds, and it's a lot easier to raise a young one and to deal with the physiological rigors of pregnancy and milk production and everything else for the females if you have good access to water. So I wouldn't say heat has an effect on the breeding season, but certainly rainfall, yes. And so most animals, and we particularly see it in lizards, in fact, you can actually see it on a lizard. They have a third eye, if you like. It's called a pineal eye that is in the center of the head. And it's eye in inverted commas. It is an organ that will pick up those changes in daylight or hours of sunlight, I suppose we should say. And then hormonal responses will happen on that basis. And that is what's actually going to sort of kickstart changing behaviors for the changing seasons. Now, of course, antelopes and things don't have a third eye in the center of their head. Pretty cool if they did, but unfortunately they do not. But they still have the ability to recognize that there are sort of, I suppose you could call them visual receptor sensors in the back of the eye that will also take into account the hours of daylight, and that will again have that sort of hormonal response for the body to respond in a certain way. But not so much heat. Certainly for me, if it's too hot, I will go and hide inside. Being born in England, I may have been guiding and living in South Africa for 20 years, but I still find it very, very difficult to deal with the heat here. I've never fully climatized to these conditions. I do struggle in the heat. I suppose I'm a bit more like a waterbuck. I do have to try and control that body temperature or replenish my water because, say, in terms of being, I can't raise my body temperature like a gemsbok can and some of the other animals out here. Wild dogs do it as well. Whilst they are chasing things, they have the same ability. But if you can raise your body temperature, then you don't sweat so much, as I said. So a gemsbok can only lose maybe 2, 3, 4 liters of fluid a day through sweating, whereas something like a waterbuck, which has that much denser, thicker fur, in extreme cases, they claim that they can lose up to 60 liters of moisture a day just through sweating. I mean, think about that, 60 liters. That's the equivalent of 30 bottles of, 2-liter bottles of Coke in terms of, or any soft drink for that matter, in terms of water loss, and that needs to be replenished. So that's why you'll often find waterbuck close to water, as the name would suggest. But that thicker fur does not help. It's like wearing a winter coat during the summer months, which I would not want to have to do, certainly. I can't believe that's the case. I think the more average is sort of 20 to 30 liters, but under extreme cases, to lose 60 liters. Imagine the weight loss. You weigh yourself at the end of the day if you're monitoring your weight, certainly if you're a waterbuck, I think. I think pretty much, if I remember, I think I'm right in saying that 1 liter of water is basically 1 kilogram. So you're potentially losing 50 to 60 kilograms of your body weight through water loss in a 24-hour period. I mean, that is ridiculous. So you can see those nice white bellies here on the springboks, as we were saying, helps to reflect that heat. And again, as I keep saying, because it's interesting for me to see different behaviors from different areas, this habit of wading in the water is something that you don't see very often. Yes, from buffalo and rhinos and things, certainly, but not from little antelope. They're normally far more skittish. or nervous around water, certainly. Speaking of ways to deal with heat, you can see, particularly with that springbok on the left there, with its bottom facing towards us, you can see that sort of white triangle. They will often stand with their buttocks facing the sun and allow that white triangle to reflect the heat. And then they also have this sort of pouch on their back, which they can open up almost like sort of a book, and reveal more of that white, which just helps them to reflect that heat. So you'll see that on very hot days, if they are standing with their rumps facing towards the sun, they'll expose that white in order to help reflect the heat. And it's also a visual display for predators. Oh, a little bit of movement there. Let's zoom out. I can't see any untoward reason why something startled them briefly there. Oh, the wildebeest come down for a drink. And of course, that sort of pouch actually gives rise to their Latin name as well, their scientific name. Antidorcus marsupialis is the springbok. The Antidorcus comes from the Greek anti, meaning not, or the opposite of, and dorcus referring to gazelle. So even though it does look a bit like a gazelle, it's not a gazelle. And then the marsupialis, just like the marsupial, like a kangaroo or a wallaby, that has that pouch where the youngsters develop after a very, very short gestation period. And the marsupialis is referring to that dorsal pouch, which opens up to help them with heat regulation. And there's also scent glands in there as well. So a bit like the impalas have those metatarsal glands on their back feet, on their back ankles, which give off a scent, which is either potentially to help animals keep together when fleeing from a predator, or possibly to just sort of saturate the air with the smell of impala and confuse a predator. We think the same thing happens with the springboks. So those pouches give off a sort of a pheromone under times of stress, and this helps the springbok keep together if they get scattered by a predator. Also note the length of the fur from the gensboks and the springboks, generally quite fine fur, lighter in color. Everything designed to try and conserve water and stop from getting so hot. Shade is at a premium out in areas like this, as you can see. Lydia, I'm sure there are. There are lots of different ways to deal with heat. As I said, having a larger body size, that ability to increase the temperature, panting through the nose, those specialized organs at the base of the brain to control the heat, the shorter fur, the ability to concentrate their urine and reabsorb some of that urine to help deal with the rigors of water loss. I have no doubt there are some mammals which don't have any mechanisms. I'm obviously now under the pressure of a question going to struggle to find a succinct answer, but perhaps the waterbuck is the best example because they do lose so much water. So their only defense really is shade and staying close to water so they can drink a lot to replenish it. I mean, even we are not designed for super hot habitats, but our ability to sweat does exactly the same thing. So when you do sweat, you are creating this sort of water film on your body, and then the air rushes across it. It evaporates, and that cools the skin and cools your internal body temperature. Of course, something like a bird is unable to sweat as such, and neither can a dog as such. So that's why you'll often see birds and dogs and cats and things panting. Birds also pant, just passing air across the tongue, because that's an exposed mucous membrane that has a moist surface and can evaporate. So that's sort of the best that they can really do. And of course, dogs can sweat through their paws as well. Possibly one of the reasons we see lions lying upside down with their feet up as well, that and to aid in digestion. Ah, there's a nice little group of wildebeest. Let's have a look at those. I've also spent some time in Irindi as well in Namibia, so a little bit further south. That's a couple of hours north of Windhoek itself, but very different habitat from what we are seeing here. And of course, there have been a lot of animals introduced to Irindi as well. I think the wildebeest struggle in these temperatures because they don't have, well, they have that longer fur, they have that more of a mane, and then of course that brindled effect of having those stripes, which is caused by longer fur. I would imagine they do struggle a little bit in the heat. There's more wildebeest coming down. Gabby Starhooked. I like that. Starstruck is another nice term we could use. Gabby, I don't know, to be quite honest. I think I've always considered myself a bit of a dreamer. I've always yearned for open spaces and for peace and tranquility. The idea of living in a big city fills me with um, horrible grief and discomfort. Just the thought of it, and dealing with traffic and large numbers of people, and very stressed sort of walking even just down the high street. I keep having to change to go around people. I was lucky enough to grow up in the country surrounded by wildlife, which is why I think I've obviously gravitated over here as I got a little bit older and found my true passion. But I've always found the stars interesting. I think I'm a bit of a dreamer as well. I find the mundane exactly that, sort of the daily grind of life. I find rather dull and boring and samey. And I've always maintained, with regards to my interest in astronomy, and especially when I'm doing evenings for people, that I think I sort of describe astronomy as exercise for the brain. We do live in a world these days where we don't have to think very much. If we don't know the answer to anything, we just search online and we get our answers, and we don't have to imagine much more. And maybe I'm the boy that never grew up. I think it's so wonderful to be able to exercise the brain and just dream and imagine of what else might be there, something bigger, something more exciting, something unusual, something against the norm. It's my way of finding sort of peace and solace in our busy life, I think. And over the years, as a as a guide, of course, we are educators, and I think the ability to pass on that to people also appeals to me. Because again, in my experience, almost everybody harbors an interest in space, but it's such a potentially daunting thing to sort of get into. It's actually not that complicated, but it's, well, obviously some of the astrophysics and things is, but I'm no astrophysicist, that's for sure. My particular interest is more in the cultural stories and how astronomy has shaped our lives, and how much of today's society is based upon astronomical observations of people in the past. I do think it is sort of in our genetics and our DNA in some way. Obviously, it was difficult growing up in the UK and not having very many clear skies, certainly. So it also benefits coming to somewhere with a slightly nicer climate. Although, again, thanks to the tropical cyclone that's caused all the rain in South Africa and Southern Africa of late, it is still frustrating here at times. I've had to cancel quite a few events over the last month or two because of inclement weather conditions. But as we move into winter, in South Africa particularly, there's this big stable area of high pressure over the center of the country. And because the high pressure cell is downward pushing masses of air, it stops moist air rising and condensing. So we would normally expect, obviously, there will be days when it doesn't occur, but generally speaking, for sort of 4 or 5 months over our winter months, skies are perfectly clear and dry as well because of that lack of moisture.
Thanks to our wonderful Wild Earth explorers, Wild Earth Kids is back. Your monthly subscriptions have allowed us to relaunch Wild Earth Schools on a weekly basis, every Wednesday for the first hour of the Sunset Safari.
You guys bring a smile to my face every single day.
Sign your class up for a special virtual field trip to Africa, because touching the lives of the future protectors of our Earth truly matters.
So going back to what I was saying about Orion there, so there's a lovely Bushman tale about actually the origin of zebras. Of course, there are lots of different um, versions of mythology, but as I always say, mythology is exactly that. It's mythology. It's not fact. You're going to read lots of different versions of the same stories as they've been changed over the years. It's not maths. 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4 in mythology, which is nice. But there's a lovely story referring to Orion's belt. So, according to Bushman, those three stars of Orion's belt, Al-Nilam, Al-Natak, and Mintaka, used to be three zebras, and back in this day, there were no zebras on Earth. They were restricted for the enjoyment of the gods. And so the story goes that the great god of the eastern sky climbed up onto the Large Magellanic Cloud, which is that sort of what also known as the Cape Cloud, one of those dwarf galaxies that orbits the Earth, that we can clearly see here in the southern hemisphere, particularly over the last few months. So the great god climbed up there with his arrow, and he tried to hunt one of those three zebras. We had the two mares, the brighter of the two stars, Al-Lam and Al-Natak, and Mintaka the stallion bringing up the rear. And he took a shot with his arrow, but missed the zebra. And that arrow is still up there as what we would consider to be Orion's sword. But he was unable to go and collect his arrow because of the lion, who was also hunting the zebra. And that lion was represented by the big red supergiant star Betelgeuse. You'll find that a lot in Bushman star lore, that red stars are often attributed to predators, probably because of the association of sort of war and blood and things. So the god was unable to retrieve his arrow, and as Orion, the constellation of Orion, slowly sunk down towards the western horizon as the evening went on, when those three stars touched the ground, the zebras were released onto Earth, because they had escaped the god. So according to the Bushmen, that's one of the origins of where the zebras on Earth actually came from. It came from Orion's belt. So quite a few blacksmith lapwings flitting around there. Lots of Egyptian geese enjoying the water as well. But those three stars of Orion's belt, there's lots of other African stories, depending on the tribes, they've been seen as 3 dogs, as 3 tortoises, as 3 warthogs. Yeah, strangely, 3 tortoises on a stick, which I've never quite understood. But again, the problem is so much of it is done through oral tradition. We have no explanation of these stories these days, and it's one of those sad things that they are becoming harder and harder to come by and harder to substantiate because oral tradition has been lost as we've moved towards a more technical age. And in fact, I actually have an acquaintance who was doing some research on traditional African style law out in Namibia, and she was going to sort of remote villages and trying to get these stories and record them before it is too late. And she said she was fairly horrified, and I can understand why, that she would go to these very remote areas, speak to the elders there, and try and get their stories. But often be told, sort of, oh, yes, no, I remember my grandmother or my grandfather told me this story, but I can't really remember what it is. And because nobody writes things down anymore, they're sort of becoming lost after the generations, which is such a shame. Certainly, when I do my evenings, yes, the visual stuff and the photographic stuff we do is interesting, but it's the stories which really hold people's interest. We are storytellers as a species. That's what we do. People used to sit around campfires and discuss things, and these beautiful stars available every night, particularly in areas like this. They envisaged certain things up in the skies, and stars are seen in rock art. We've got examples of Orion and the Seven Sisters and Taurus being immortalized in cave paintings in France that are potentially 20,000 years old. Bush baby, well, the constellation Leo, there, of course, depends on which culture you look at. The most famous story behind Leo comes from Greek mythology, as most of the star lore does. It's supposed to sort of signify a lion lying on the savannah with his head up looking around. There are some people who suggest that it could be relevant to the Sphinx in Egypt, or maybe the Sphinx is an embodiment of Leo. But the most famous story actually refers back to the 12 labors of Hercules, the great Greek hero, whose first labor was to capture the Nemean lion, which was a sort of a giant lion who was impervious to any weapon forged by man, and Hercules was tasked to kill it, and he had to do those 12 labors to atone for the fact that due to the fact that, well, let me give you the full story. So Hercules was an illegitimate child of Zeus, and Zeus's wife Hera was very upset that Zeus had fathered Hercules with another woman. And so to punish Hercules, turned Hercules mad and actually caused him to kill his family and his children, which is obviously not a very nice story. But in order to atone for those deeds, he was set these originally 10 labors, which then turned out to be 12. And the very first one was to slay this lion. So he found the lion in a cave somewhere, tried to shoot it with his arrows and things, realized that the pelt was impervious. So eventually cornered the lion, and they had a big fight, and he was able to strangle the lion to finally kill it, and then use the lion's own claw to skin the lion, and then Hercules would wear the lion's skin as his armor moving forward for a lot of his other the other labors that he had to do. So that is the most famous story behind Orion. And its brightest star is actually called Regulus, which, as we look at it in the southern hemisphere, is sort of in the top left-hand corner. And Regulus comes from the Latin meaning little king. And it is considered to be one of the oldest of all of the known constellations. Remember, we generally know about the Greek mythology, but the Greeks inherited a lot of these shapes and these stories from previous civilizations like the Sumerians and the Babylonians particularly, and there's certainly various suggestions that the Sumerians and Babylonians also saw Leo, the constellation, as a lion, and then the Greeks adopted it and they superimposed their cultural stories onto the pre-existing shape. There are no wildebeest up in the sky, but according to the Bushman, Spica, which is the brightest star in Virgo, is known as the wildebeest star because its visibility used to coincide with the calving season of the wildebeest. And again, you'll find there's a lot of references to that in African cultural astronomy where things are named after the availability of certain resources at a given time. So the wildebeest star referring to, say, when it's available, which was obviously a good resource for people. Let's see what else we could see. Had all around for a while. I've been busy waxing lyrical about stars, as always. I've actually got to go out this evening to help somebody locally who's got a new telescope and having some problems setting it up. So that is my job for tonight, to go there and show them how to get the best out of their equipment. Lots and lots of springboks still making their way down. I'd like to scroll a bit quicker, but unfortunately it's not very responsive, this waterhole, so you'll excuse me if we do a very slow pan across the dam here. Oh, it's an elephant. Where did you come from? Brilliant. Maybe the only elephant. Let's see. Well, there's lots of elephants. This is the problem when you're zoomed in. You miss all of this stuff happening. It's much nicer to have eyes on things rather than a camera. I wonder how long they've been here. Lots of them. Fantastic. I'm going to have to keep a more of a zoomed out look. I wonder what else we've missed. Now, there's an example of an animal that has a very big body size, of course, and can deal with that heat because of that surface area to volume ratio, but very much high water requirements. How fantastic. Add that to my list of things that we've seen on the waterhole today. Lovely to see some little ones. Those of you who know me will know this makes me very happy. I do enjoy watching elephants, perhaps more so than anything else. Leopards for their aesthetic beauty, yes, but elephants just for their entertainment value and their interest in their behavior and specifically their, of course, social interactions with one another. That emotional intelligence manifests itself, and when you do get up close and personal with one of these things, you can really see them processing, and their eyes contain so much life. It's quite humbling to spend time amongst these gentle giants. Niall, that's a good question, to which I don't know the official answer to that. I think they probably will learn techniques from their parents, but generally speaking, all mammals are born with the innate ability to swim, just like humans are as well. Often, young babies are taken for swimming when they are young. Don't forget, we grow in a big sack of amniotic fluid, so we are used to being in water, and it seems to be just sort of genetic knowledge for a lot of animals of how to swim. But, where they can move around in the water and are less fearful of water and perhaps develop more fear of water as we grow up and understand our surroundings better. But, of course, they don't know how to do front crawl or freestyle or breaststroke or butterfly or backstroke. Those sort of techniques are learnt through experience and also from watching and learning from other individuals. But the innate ability to swim, I would think, in elephants is there from birth, genetic knowledge passed on. Amazing to think that elephants can swim, certainly. And amazing that they float, being so big. You'd think they'd sink to the bottom like a stone. Hippos, of course, do sink to the bottom, but they've got special adaptations to allow them to do so. They've got very, very heavy bones in their legs, which anchor them to the floor, a little bit like a diver's weight belt. But it is fantastic seeing elephants swimming around in the water. Not something I've seen very often in my time at Djuma. Occasionally I've seen it, but it seems to be at Pridelands. When we're out and listening to what Chris and Rex and whoever else is at Pridelands is seeing there, it seems very regular that the elephants in Pridelands go for a dip. What a lovely scene. This has massive water requirements. We normally say that a big bull requires somewhere between 120 to 150 litres of water a day. I wouldn't like to think what these animals need to get, particularly in those more harsh environments, probably more than that. I'm actually just sort of watching here. They do seem to be drinking for a little bit longer. Often in the Kruger area, they'll come down, they'll have a drink, and then they'll carry on. These ones have had quite a few slurps out of their trunks. Note to self, stay a little bit more zoomed out so we don't miss interesting things like this. Slightly closer look. Cobra, not really. So generally speaking, so never say never, but a herd of elephants will be made up of all related individuals. What can happen is two herds may come together, of course, particularly if there are relations. So you might get a herd that splits over time for whatever reason, and then they may sort of come back and join with one another again. But generally speaking, a herd structure will all be related individuals, mostly females, but of course young males as well. And then the males, excuse me, the males will go their separate ways once they reach puberty, basically. But if you take that big herd of zebra that we saw coming down a little bit earlier, there, even though it was a big group, there would have been multiple family groups within there. So there would have been stallions with his little harem of females, but they're coming together due to availability of a particular resource, in this case, water, and also safety in numbers. Of course, elephants don't have to worry too much about predation. So this is a lot longer than I'd expect elephants to normally in the Kruger area, in the Lowveld, to come down and drink, obviously because of the harsher conditions. The trunk can easily contain sort of 20-25 litres of water. I love the way when they come out of the water, they look like they've got little booties on, where the skin has been stained darker. These two walking side by side. It looks like they've got little Wellington boots on that they've been paddling around in the water. Let's see if they are now vacating the area. One little patch of shade, and I suppose there aren't more animals utilising that shade. Again, we've just gone to the other side of the dam, continued drinking. The other ones have obviously moved off to the left, I'm guessing, disappeared. Quite hard to get a scale and to keep track of things in this scenario, though. maybe this is all of them still here. But I think that might be end of drinking time. See that one at the front looking back and saying, come on, right, everybody, time to move on. Beautiful. Notice how all the other animals have moved out of the way. Elephants don't like sharing their water. I've seen many times they'll often chase things out of the way. Everybody else just hanging out in the periphery. Nice to be the big fish in the ponds, that's for sure. We're still going to have more drinks. Lovely contrast of the blue against the whitish rocks there as well. I actually have to have a look and see if I can find any statistics as what the average amount of water that a desert elephant, as it were, drinks in comparison to a savanna elephant. These are, of course, savanna elephants. When I was up in Damaraland, we did see what were considered to be desert elephants. It's not a different species or anything, but just they are slightly different. I think they've got slightly bigger feet. And then it struck me as being a little bit larger, which was, again, all to do with that body size, body heat ratio of volume. But this is certainly the longest I can remember watching a single herd of elephants having a drink. Sure, sometimes they play around in the water and might hang around for a while, but this has been almost constant drinking since we've seen them. Would be great if we could have a rhino coming down to drink. But so rhinos, as a rule, generally drink towards the latter part of the day as it's cooling off. We sort of joke that it's happy hour. Sunset is happy hour for the rhinos. But of course, elephants will come down at any point. If it's a hot day, you can expect elephants at any time. Looks like some gemsbok also beginning to move in from the distance. Little springbok taking a sneaky opportunity to drink behind the elephant's back. See those ears working overtime as well, fanning. I'm not actually sure what the temperature is out in for you at the moment. I'll have to check. Okay, that does look like it might be it. Unless they're just going to try another part of the dam. They seem to have sort of systematically worked around the dam, sampling water from all different areas. I'm sure this is pumped. But normally you see the elephants are sort of clustered around where the pipe is feeding into the dam. But without knowing the specifics of this waterhole, it's hard to say for sure. But unusual that they've sort of moved around almost the whole periphery of the dam, sampled the water from each different compass point. Makes you wonder where they go now, eh? And now the elephant's moved off and everything else is coming down. Kathy Lee, I will have to double check the specifics. Obviously, it depends on the size of the elephant, and I'm sure there's differ between individuals. But from memory, I think it's around about 25 liters there or thereabouts, or for a big adult bull. I mean, much as I don't agree with them or don't particularly enjoy them, I have been to these sort of elephant interaction places where you get up close and personal with them. And like a big bucket of water. I mean, they just put their trunk in and go, and it's gone in seconds, which I think is around about 20 liters or so of water that can be held in one of those buckets. So yeah, I'll double check for you, but I'm pretty sure it's up to about 25 liters. Of course, then up into the trunk, a valve at the top to stop it going into their going down the throat the wrong way. If you've ever sort of gone upside down in the water and you get water up your nose, it's a horrible, horrible feeling. And then spray it either into the mouth or all over the body to cool them down. And then don't forget as well, of course, elephants have got that pharyngeal pouch, that little adaptation in the throat where they can store a couple of liters of water for later use under times of extreme stress. They can sort of dip their trunk into their throat and can kind of suck it out of there. Interesting now the elephants have disappeared. Everything else is coming down to the water now. Constable Springbok, there's Gemsbok in the background, and also noted an opportunity, I think, heading down. Bye-bye, elephants. Thank you for your little unexpected cameo. Very, very busy waterhole, though. If you go and sit down next to sort of Treehouse Dam or where the dam can is on Djuma, you'll often go hours without seeing any animals. But in a place like this, say this is an oasis, a hub of activity. Caravan of elephants disappearing into the distance. It's quite a nice sight. Lovely the way they will walk in single file, just how the animals move in the bush. And it's how we walk in the bush as well when we do our walking qualifications as guides. It's one of the first things you sort of learn, and certainly one thing you instruct people whilst walking through the bush, that we walk in single file. Lots of reasons for that. The main one being that we're doing less damage walking in single file, of course, walking abreast, and it means that sort of the less risk certainly for people to tread on a snake or something that's there if you all follow the same path, and also it's just a lot less threatening, and it's probably an evolutionary thing as well to look like there are less of you. But you imagine if you have a whole bunch of people walking down the road towards you abreast of one another, it's a far more aggressive posture than if you were in single file. We try and be like the animals. Hoping this Gemsbok comes down for a drink as well. So we just saw the one earlier. Nice little group here. Magnificent horns and scimitar-like horns. There, those lovely colours, as you said, generally lighter colours, short fur in comparison to a lot of the other antelope, just to deal with that heat. Those horns really are rather spectacular. There's beautiful facial markings. There's even a little rodent which is named after the Gemsbok on account of those markings on the face. It's Afrikaans name for the rodent. I forget what it is exactly, but it has the word Gems in it. It's that black and white marking, although the word Gems has nothing to do with that. Obviously, the etymology of that rodent's name. Try and find the name of that little mouse because it was rather cute. It was something I only found out recently whilst doing a little bit of reading up on Gemsbok because I knew I was going to see a few more. Yes, it's a spectacled dormouse. That's right. And in Afrikaans, it's called a Gemsbok mace, a Gemsbok mouse, referring to that black and white facial marking. But the word Gem actually has nothing to do with it. There is a European antelope called a Gem, or gem, I suppose it would be in European, and apparently that they have that sort of similar facial markings again, and therefore it was likely that the Dutch explorers, when they came down here, of course, which is where the Afrikaans name originally comes from, saw this antelope, and despite not being related, had similar markings, so went with a similar name. It's more of a mountain animal, the European version. But it's that black and white face, which we think is probably the origin. Almost like a mime artist. Confidently striding out into the water. Sorry, I know I keep talking about it, but that's very unusual for me. I'm just very much not used to seeing that. Right, well, that was a lovely bit of time spent here at Crewe. So let's send you back over to the Eastern Cape, right on the other side of the continent, and see what's happening in Kiriga.
So our breeding herd of buffalo here on the Kariega Game Reserve have gotten up. They're feeding around a little bit. There's some of them that are still lying down, ruminating, doing their thing. And I've walked these buffalo many times as well. I've had some wonderful encounters with them where we've been very close with the wind very strong in our faces, and they didn't know that we were there. But we've also had other times when they've caught us out in the open plain, and we've had to seek the relative shelter of the Scotia trees next to the Scotia Dam, and also resulted in wonderful encounters with buffalo all around us, but us in a safe position up in the tree. I've had students with me, and there were some amazing photographs that came as a result, but initially quite scary. If you have a whole herd of buffalo coming towards you menacingly when you're on foot, you would understand. It's one of those situations that really gets your heart going, adrenaline pumping, and you've got to have your wits about you, because you need to put yourself in a safe position, whether you can gain elevation, which when we were out in the plain, the only elevation we could get was the trees, and that was our safety. But I've also had times when we've been able to go up into the thickets and get above them. That is of utmost importance, so both with buffalo and with elephants, sometimes with lions as well. As long as you can get above them, you do stand yourself in much better stead. I've had it many times as well with elephants, where as long as we could get on the rocks or on a higher position, you can actually be quite safe with them coming very, very close to you. A few times in the desert in Namibia, I've anticipated where the elephants were going to move, and we've gone up into the granite rocks above little water holes. And the elephants have come and drunk literally within 5 meters of us, but we're right above them in safe position. And what a wonderful experience for the guests that I had. But in this kind of position, these buffalo are very, very relaxed. But it's incredible if you were to approach them on foot how quickly they would jump into formation. And you'd have those big bulls coming out and forming a laager and a buffer in the front, with the females and the youngsters sort of protected on the inside. So even though they don't have this predator pressure that you may see on bigger reserves and national parks, they still are very quick to get into their safe formations. Here the somber green bulls calling, all in the thickets, and the red-fronted tinkerbirds. So this cold front's still with us, although there's not any rain. It's really affecting the behavior of the animals, where they are seeking the relative shelter, on the right side of the thickets, and not really going down to drink. I think with that rain there are still lots of puddles around, so nice and easy to get water. Maybe they'll go for a drink a little bit later, who knows, but I wouldn't bank on it. They're not the only ones out here. A nice group of blesbok. Some that are lying down, some that are standing up. And this one over here in particular is doing the typical blesbok pose. He's given up, head hanging low. And I've seen an increase in the males starting to fight with each other. I see blesbok being quite territorial, but even the young males are starting to spar, and there's a lot more sort of chasing around of the males. The impala are also starting to snort and do their typical rutting behavior a lot more. It's just beginning, but it seems like there's going to be a lot more aggression in the coming days between the males. Can be good for the predators though, because they're so consumed with fighting with each other that they actually are easy prey during these times. So one standing up, one lying down. Few lying down. There's our friends, the Hadidars, calling. Southern Bubu, you can hear that. My favorite bubu, I must say, is probably the tropical bubu that you'll hear in Makaleki areas along the Fever-Tree Forest, in the northern parts of the Kruger, the extreme north. Spent lots of time there too, on foot, training trails rangers, as I have here on Kariega. It's wonderful to...
We hope that when you watch Wild Earth, you will fall in love with nature. We know that our explorers share a passion for nature and want to make a difference. Wild Earth Schools is back. Sign up to be an explorer, and your subscription will help us reach the future conservationists of our planet. Invest in something that truly matters, encouraging children to care for our beautiful wild earth. Wild Earth Explorers, make a difference.
So you can find that the animals are also quite affected by the weather, and if it's either cold or very hot, they can be sort of less active. A couple of monkeys alarm calling off in the thickets, and I would assume that it's either the crowned eagles that I've also heard calling quite regularly. On a day like this, though, the predatory birds, they do find it difficult. Crowned eagle, quite a big bird. They do like it when it's hot. They can get the thermals. Vultures as well. Obviously we don't have many vultures here in the Eastern Cape anymore, but the bigger birds do struggle when it's cooler like this. And while we're watching this group of buffalo, which is quite nice, even though they're a little bit inactive, if you have got any videos that you've got epic encounters, that maybe you went on safari or you had something happen wherever it might be involving wildlife, and you would like to send it into Wild Earth, please do so. And in fact, there is remuneration offered for those that are chosen that are truly fantastic, and you can go on the website or on the app and check it out for the user generated content. We'd love to see your videos. Sun is poking out a little bit more now, and I'm hoping that that wind is going to drop a little bit more. I'm also hoping that we may see some of the special hornbills that we get down here, such as the crowned hornbill, which you won't see generally in other parts of the country. We also have the trumpeter hornbills, but you do get those in other parts. I've heard them calling over the last couple of days. They generally do like to stick around the thickets, like the turacos, like the boobos, like the green bulls. It's difficult to get them on the camera, as with all the birds generally. And it's always Murphy's Law. As soon as they say in our ears, live, live, the bird seems to hear it and they fly off. It's crazy. Some of the best sightings that I've had with Wild Earth have been in those seconds before we go live. And then we have to talk about what was, which isn't the idea really. So I'm just trying to see where would be the best place for us to focus in on, because there's lots and lots of buffalo here. Chewing the cud. A lot of the migratory birds now have already left. We don't have the Amur falcons around anymore. The yellow-billed kites have gone. Amur falcons headed back to China. The yellow-billed kites have headed back to the Russian steppes. And then a lot of the swallows, and most proficiently the lesser striped swallow, they come down here in big numbers during the summer months, but they've all left now as well. There's one or two stragglers. It's mainly down to the little fledglings that haven't quite learned to fly yet, and the adults still trying to teach them before they go on their first extensive journey up north into Europe. Haven't seen any of the oxpeckers on the buffalo recently either. But they're not migratory. Obviously they stick around here, and also being cooperative breeders, they generally come in groups But the only thing that I've seen on them this morning is pied crows. So obviously also coming in potentially for the ticks, but they're not as well adapted to picking off ticks off buffalo than the likes of the oxpeckers. You often find the little wagtails as well, Cape wagtail, moving in and around the groups of buffalo. It's just blasted by wind here now, very gusty. And they come in for the insects that the buffaloes bump up as they're walking around. So that's what the little wagtails are there for. You often see them walking in between rhino, elephant, etc. Often see the little babies. I've often watched baby elephants chasing the little wagtails around. So Mandy, you want to know why it's called chewing the cud. Let's find one that is doing exactly that. Let's go in on that one with the crow. Let's sat on there. What is he doing? So you see how that buffalo is just okay. Now, of course, as I said, that puts his head down. Let's see what that crow's doing. So they're ruminating when they're chewing the cud, as cows do. And so you'll see ruminants. They spend a lot of time feeding and actually taking up the grass, biting it off, chewing it, swallowing it. And they continue with that for, it can be a couple of hours. Then they need to spend a similar amount of time actually digesting, because they've got an extensive digestive system and a number of stomachs, the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum, which the process of digestion literally is a lot of regurgitation of that plant matter, and in this case with the buffalo it's grass, and they regurgitate it. So they bite it off, chew it, swallow it into the rumen. Then they ruminate with that first sort of chamber. It is regurgitated a number of times, chewed, added with saliva, swallowed, and eventually then it sort of goes through to the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum, with different fermentation and all sorts happening in the different chambers. So when we say chewing the cud, it's literally ruminating, and it's the regurgitation and re-chewing of the grass or browse that they've taken in. But it's a whole process of breaking down the material that they're trying to digest. As you see them now, flicking their ears and chewing. But you can often see, especially with animals with long necks, when those balls actually come up while they regurgitate. So there's a period of static activity in the mouth area, and then you'll see this ball coming up the neck and arrives in the mouth, and then they start chewing again. And then they'll swallow and you'll see it go down, and then you'll see after a small period of time another ball will come up and they'll chew that again. So in so doing, breaking it down, adding saliva, enzymes, and obviously trying to break down that food. And it's a relatively efficient process. It is way more efficient than the hindgut fermenters such as elephants, rhino, zebra, warthogs. But there's pros and cons of both. So obviously the animals that do ruminate, they can feed on the hoof, they can feed while they're walking, while they're moving, but then they need to spend an amount of time inactive chewing the cud. Whereas the hindgut fermenters need to and do spend their entire time on the hoof feeding. They need to feed a lot more because the process of their digestion is a lot less sufficient, or it's not as good as the ruminants because of that process, especially of constantly re-chewing the same matter. So theirs is literally extracting the calories through a fermentation process. So in the pros of the hindgut fermenters, they don't need to spend this time inactive, actually going through the process of digesting. But as a result, their digestion is not as well formulated, and they need to eat more. So the likes of elephant need to eat a lot more than the likes of buffalo, just to get those calories in, because most of it they just pass through. So, and there we've got exactly what I was talking about, two very different animals in terms of their digestion. The warthog is a hindgut fermenter and a bulk grazer, and can very easily, if in large numbers, they will be a very big part of overgrazing, because of the amount of food that they need to take in to get the amount of calories that they require to survive. Whereas buffalo wouldn't be as big of a factor with overgrazing, if in similar numbers to the warthogs, because they're more efficient in the digestion process. So zebra, warthogs, even rhino, they can, very easily be a big part of overgrazing. And so they are animals that, especially on private reserves, need to be managed in terms of their numbers and the carrying capacity of the specific area, and also where you then put your water provisions, and in the case where you need to give them any supplements such as salt licks, etc., the positioning of the water holes and the water provision as well as those supplements need to be very it needs to be researched to take the animals away from the areas that are easily overgrazed to areas that need further grazing or are not as susceptible to overgrazing. And that's what we learnt in conservation or wildlife management, was very, very easy to manipulate animals with especially water and water holes, water provision, and the placement thereof. So where you put that, because you have some grass species that actually do well with more grazing, and a lot of species that are very highly affected to trampling and to overgrazing. So you want to take them to the areas, to the grasses that need more grazing. And so you can also manipulate the succession of the particular areas as well by, putting those supplements and water holes in different areas, and then in so doing you drive the animals to different parts of the property or the actual land under your custodianship. So animals are easily manipulated in terms of the resources that are available to them, and if it's possible, you want to try and keep them in the areas that are less susceptible. Especially with buffalo, they can also have a big impact on the trampling. Big heavy animals, and their hooves do go into the ground and can compact specific areas very easily. So if you look at a lot of water holes, you can see that a lot of the areas around that is decimated. And it does come as mostly as that, trampling. You can have elephants pushing trees over, and the animals will graze in the immediate surroundings next to the places where they obtain water and when supplements are supplied as well. So important to remember that, and to keep the manipulation in the right areas. Sleepy buffalo. Looks like most of our blesbok are now up. You do see a bit of ella grooming in blesbok, but it's not quite as much as you might see with impala. That one looks like it's getting a little bit old for suckling. It's still getting some milk from mum. couple of birds walking around feeding here too. I just want to see if I can get them in. There they are. These are ravens. Very, very clever birds indeed. Alrighty, so I'm just going to carry on mixing it up here, seeing what these animals get up to, and maybe we have a few more bird visitors. But it seems I'm not the only one that's hoping for visitors, and it seems like Lauren has one in Madikwe.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nope, it's still the morning for 8 more minutes. Apologies. Good morning, everyone. We have a lovely start to Madikwe Game Reserve here. Big difference in weather from this morning. The sun is just out and oh, it's happy to let everybody know that it's out. Please don't walk away, elephant. We're going to stay on the elephant for a little bit longer in case he disappears. But if you are wondering who the voice is, my name is Lauren, and the man operating the camera is Rian. But before this elephant disappears, we just thought we'd let you see him. We've had a bit of a tricky morning in Madikwe signal-wise, but I think all the animals are just relishing the fact that it's just, it's gone back to those gorgeous piping hot days. That weather system that passed over seems to have moved off for now. Touch wood. I'm literally touching the wood on the car here. And normality has resumed. It was a really, really misty morning this morning. Oh, foggy, actually. We could hardly see anything. It was very impressive to see animals in those conditions. But the sun just burst through about 9 a.m. and it's hot. This gorgeous younger bull on his own. I was hoping to find a herd, but never mind. One is better than none. Sally, you love the brownish colour of the Madikwe elephants. Yes, it's just due to the sand. It gives them a different sort of appearance than maybe elephants in the Lowveld, but they are still the same colour. Obviously, elephants are notorious for dust bathing, mud bathing, wallowing, splashing, having the time of their lives, really. So they're often covered in the soil and the sediment of the surroundings. And of course, here in Madikwe, the sand is very, very red. Iron oxide in there gives it that rufous red colour, which is just, it's beautiful. If you look at the elephants in areas, in very arid areas like Etosha over in Namibia, you will see that the sand is very, very white there. And the elephants can look really, really whitish and pale grey. Ah, got a zebra bum in the background. Do you see that? Yeah, just here. It's a zebra bum. I can imagine the water holes will be busy this afternoon with this sort of change in temperature. From a miserable day yesterday, cold night, to soaring temperatures.
On April 27th, Wild Earth will be celebrating a very special birthday. It's our Sweet 16. We want to celebrate you, our viewers who have been with us every step of the way.
I just appreciate you so much.
Send in your birthday wishes so we can include you in the celebrations.
Happy birthday, Wild Earth!
Video yourself saying happy birthday to Wild Earth with a short note and share them with us on Birthday at Wild Earth TV.
Still here. Now he's on the other side of the road finding something even more delicious. And if you think about it, elephants just feed all day, all night. Walk to water, have a drink, walk and feed, walk and feed, walk and feed. And they know exactly what they want to eat. They can smell the deliciousness. They can smell those palatable plants that they want. Which ones are most nutritious? Which ones are their favorite? Oh my goodness, Kathy Lee, you have been up all night watching Wild Earth. It's 6 a.m. now, but of course we had the sunrise safari and we're now, well, we're almost at the end of Escape to Nature. Wow, that's dedication. So you've seen it all this morning. I'm glad to hear that. I hope you get some sleep soon though. Now, we're not going to follow him. I don't enjoy following elephants sort of up their bum, especially not young boys. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think you need to. So if he's decided to dominate the road, then we shall watch him walk down it, dominating the landscape as he goes. He may get another view now that he's off the road. I just don't think it's very necessary to follow animals sometimes up their bottom. I think it can irritate many animals. I like to get ahead of the animal if you can. It's not always possible, I know that, but especially elephants. We had a bit of a run-in with a male elephant the other night as we were trying to get home. It's a male that's notorious for being, well, notorious, Mr. Notorious, B.I.G., we should call him, and he gave us a hard time. He really wasn't happy. Just another reminder that they are the bossies out here. He is going into the thicket, but Rian might be able to give you a view there. I just don't like following them from behind. Elephants are taller than most of the trees here. Some of the shepherd trees are not that tall yet. The acacias, the sweet thorns, sickle bush. Ali, you like watching that big bum in the road walking away from us. So do I. As long as I'm not following up behind that bum, I like watching them walk away. I love how they just disappear into the landscape like they're being swallowed up. Think like a mountain. The elephant definitely does. I love that concept in ecology. I think sometimes we think too isolated. I definitely did, but I've tried really hard over the past few years to not think so isolated. Try not to think about one thing. Try not to think about one sense. Try not to think about one element, because really in ecology is a system as a whole. Ecology is a relationship with the organism and its surroundings. So always try to think about it as a whole. And just a reminder, everyone, from Wednesday the 12th, which I believe is tomorrow, I lose track of the days here, our schools program will be back, and teachers, you can register your class for this initiative. You can get your class on board, and to find out more, you just head over to wildearth.tv/register, /kids, my bad, and you can register your class for our schools program. It's like that concept, think like a mountain, where I read about it in a book called It's Not About the Bats. And it questions, is an elephant really an elephant if you take it out of its environment and you put it in a cage in captivity? Is it still an elephant? It's a great question to ask. It's a great question to think about. Because the phenotype is, it looks like an elephant, yes. by taking out of its environment, you've separated it. It's no longer thinking like a mountain. You've separated it from everything it knows. Social bonds, activities, touching, communicating, foraging, suckling, sparring, breaking branches, chasing guinea fowl. You know all the things you do if you're an elephant. So if you take an elephant, especially a young one, baby elephant, put them in a cage, although externally they appear to be an elephant, it's not an elephant as an elephant should be, shaped by its natural surroundings. So over time, that cage, that captivity, will begin to shape that elephant into a completely new creature, which may retain the physical attributes of an elephant, but it's going to lose many of the ways of expression, if you like, informed by its relation to the wild. Because it's no longer got that relationship with the wild, and it's lost what it means to be an elephant. So when we say ecology, we're talking about everything. Think like a mountain. Ecology is a poetic science. Ecology is not grass, leaves, insects, elephant. It's everything. It's the relationships. It's the sounds that we don't hear, the smells that we can't smell, the invisible, time, movement, patterns. It's everything. So I think we have lost our elephant, I'm afraid. I hope you're pondering over that. It's a wonderful book. It's not about the bats. It's very controversial, South African author, but it's really, really wonderful, and it puts a lot of things into perspective. Whether you agree or not, it's always just good to read different opinions, and it goes deep into a lot of things that I've never even thought of before, and that was one of them. Are going to head back onto the main road. I'll probably have to pop my sunglasses on, I'm afraid. It's rather hot. Okay, as we search high and low for animals, we're going to send you guys back over to Ben, who's at Bokokoyo.
All right, great. Well, glad you got an up close and personal view of an elephant there with Lauren. We have not had any more elephant activity. We've had a steady stream of zebras and gemsbok and springbok down. We had a brief moment of excitement earlier. We were watching some of these springbok milling around on the side or on the edge of the dam here. Then suddenly everybody ran off, but I was unable to find the cause of the disturbance. I think possibly because what you can't see from the camera here is that there is a camp very close by, sort of just behind the viewpoint of the camera. So I think it was some people walking along the fence line, probably their movement disturbed them. But there was no sign of any approaching predators, unfortunately. But we haven't seen any more elephants. We did have some kudu come down for a drink, which was nice. The one and only little group of kudu that we've seen thus far this morning. But again, at the moment, more springboks and a couple of gemsbok that have come down. And again, this one confidently wading into the center of the water, so it quenches thirst. But some interesting discussions being had by all. I was listening intently there to Ralph's discussion of the impact of grazing or grazers and things on the grass. And how buffaloes and zebras in particular can be detrimental because of their habit of eating so much and trampling. But I thought I would just add, and if Ralph did say this, my apologies, but there are some environmental pros, of course, of having that done. When you have those big swathes of buffalo moving through the landscape, yes, of course, they do a lot of grazing damage, but what they also do is produce an awful lot of dung. And because of their habit of continuously moving, and Ralph was talking about how they tend to compact the soil. The other thing they do is the ones in the front of the herd that are excreting, that dung contains lots of good nutrition for the soil. That's why we put fertilizer on our gardens and things, so to help our flowers grow. It's nitrogen based, and ammonia and things, which is good for, or ammonia can be converted into nitrogen by things like the rhizobium bacteria. And as those animals are defecating, the ones behind are treading on it and sort of grinding it into the soil. So, in effect, where we have to stand there and use a fork and turn our gardens over and put fertilizer on it or manure on our gardens and then turn it into the soil, the buffalo actually do that for nature themselves. So I'm sure they don't do it on purpose, but there are pros as well as cons. But nature is all about balance. Too much of one thing, we're going to have a problem. But as long as numbers are kept in check, generally speaking, nature will find a way to make everything work. Don't forget, it's had 4.5 billion years of practice. So if our Hunsbox had enough, it's his plan. Let's have a look. So again, difficult to see from here, and I don't want to zoom too far in because then I can't see what else is happening, but likely a male, I would think, being on his own now. Scattering a little bit, but I see this springbok here doesn't look too concerned by life. But I do think perhaps some of the movement of people too close to the fence is what causes them to move occasionally. Although you would think they've become quite used to it. I mean, certainly there at Djuma, we've got a couple of Inyalas that have taken up permanent residence in the camp, and they actually come and sort of sit with us whilst we're having dinner. They just sort of hang around only a few meters away from us when we walk past them. But Inyalas particularly seem to gravitate towards sort of habitated areas, obviously because we tend to water those areas, particularly at lodges. We don't do it at Djuma, but you do get a lot more better vegetation. That's not very good English, but you know what I mean. And they've learnt that, and I'm sure they also know that there's probably less of a risk of predators and things as well. Let's see what's going on the left. I have been scanning these shadows and things, but I haven't found anything. And I know Ralph did suggest that we check that sort of pile of old elephant dung and things on the right to look for jackals hiding in and amongst it, but no luck. But what we do have is plenty of Egyptian geese. Fairly stable bird anyway you go in southern Africa. That nice wing bar on the one in the middle there. It's like he's having a groom. Or is he sleeping? Trying to get close enough that we can see. Yeah, I think we're all just having a little bit of a groom. Of course, keeping those feathers very important, especially for something like an Egyptian goose, duck, a heavy bird when it flies. Yeah, it's a more springbok having a drink. It's amazing how many of them keep coming down here. That's not the animal I've spent a huge amount of time with, springboks. As I said before, I have seen them in various places, but it's not an animal that I've had the fortune of spending huge amounts of time with. I would say I always look forward to seeing those Gemsbok. I think I once saw Gemsbok in Kruger, but they're very, very, very rarely seen. Not really their habitat. You see one disappearing into the distance with those long pointed horns. I remember when I was spending some time at Flossesvlei Desert Lodge there with the little water point in front of the lodge there, you'd see these caravans of Gemsbok coming in for a drink, and they drink, and then just like this one, turn around and then disappear back off into the dunes. And it's an absolute mystery that they can survive in those areas. But just like we have game trails out in the Lowveld, we see the same through the sort of the desert rocks and the sand. More zebbies coming in for a drink. But their digestive system is truly incredible, the Gemsbok. Yes, they're ruminants, but they actually hold the record for keeping the food in their bodies for the longest amount of time of any antelope over here, as far as I am aware. And the benefit of that means that they can eat that food, and then because of their very efficient digestive system, the food can stay in their body for up to around about 3 days, or 72 hours or more, perhaps even longer. And that's a wonderful adaptation to ensure that you extract every last piece of usable material from it. But if you are unable to get good quality produce, it means that you're left with a whole bunch of rubbish in your body for a long period of time, and that actually can lead to starvation under difficult times when the palatability or nutritional value of the food available is not very good. Whereas it's like eating a bunch of fast food and nothing else. It just stays in your body, and try as it might, your body is unable to extract sufficient nutrients from it. And of course, in an effect, they also feed themselves, because that rumen is jam-packed full of microorganisms and flora, and probiotic flora, that sort of thing. That's what helps to break down those starchy elements of plant material. And there are literally up to trillions of organisms in a ruminant's rumen. When they die, they also pass through the digestive tract, and because they are, I suppose, in an effect, you could say meat, they're living organisms, living animals, they actually also do add to the protein intake of the animal. And a lot of them pass through the gut and come out in the dung. And we see that in the other hindgut fermenters, so like these zebras and elephants and rhinos, that the very first solid food that a youngster will eat will actually be the dung of the parents, and that's in order to get those microorganisms, which in the case of those animals are concentrated in the cecum, which is after the stomach, as opposed to the rumen, which is before the stomach. But that just gives those young animals a bit of a kickstart. They are able to get those bacteria and things into the stomach, which can then reproduce and allow that animal to extract nutrition, but in a different way. So that's sort of post-gut fermentation as opposed to foregut fermentation. But the rumen is an incredible thing. It can account for a huge percentage of an animal's body weight, but it does require lots and lots of saliva, and it blows my mind to think a buffalo or a cow, for example, can produce up to 200 liters of saliva a day. That saliva just helps with the digestive processing. But imagine producing 200 liters, that's the size of like a petrol drum, of saliva on a daily basis. I think it'd be drooling everywhere. And these zebras doing a good job of hydrating themselves. Of course, we've been talking a lot about the different mechanisms that animals have to deal with the heat. Zebras, of course, famed for their stripes, and one of the many suggestions, bearing in mind there are lots of theories as to the predominant role of the stripes, although of course it's probably a little bit of everything, is heat regulation. By having white and black, the white reflects the heat, the black absorbs more heat, and there are a lot of capillaries of tiny little veins, capillaries in those black stripes. So by having one part of your body reflecting heat, another part potentially absorbing heat, it creates what we call a pressure differential, and that actually creates a draft of air over the animal's body. So the air sort of moves from the white to the black, blows over the black, and that cools down that blood, which is then circulated around the rest of the body. And zebras are well known to have a large amount of subcutaneous fat. so that once that cooler blood has been circulated into the body, that fat acts as an insulation cover to stop it being warmed up by atmospheric environmental conditions. Yes, every time I look around, we find more animals drinking. Jeffrey, well, a lot of animals have, excuse me, a lot of animals have quite tough lips and upper sort of bony palates in the mouth, so that if they do ingest thorns, a lot of the time they are ground up. Certainly, things like elephants that don't chew their food very well and rely on their digestion, which is not particularly efficient, it does mean that a lot of those things pass through the digestive tract completely undigested and untouched. And in fact, if you go and pick through some elephant dung, say in sort of February over here in the Lowveld where the marulas are fruiting, you can find whole marulas still with their skin intact. And whilst you probably wouldn't want to, I mean, you could just run them under a tap, hose them down, and probably eat them. They literally have, even the skin hasn't been broken. So a lot of the time the thorns do pass straight through the body as well. That's one of the main reasons that we try not to run over elephant dung. Obviously, yes, they are little micro ecosystems. There's so much happening inside dung. There's all the things processing it, the dung beetles and everything else. So we don't want to damage the miniature ecosystem, but also you do run the risk of getting a flat tire by driving over elephant dung, particularly if they've been eating things like sicklebush, which have notoriously sharp thorns, and not just sharp, but very, very sturdy as well. A little acacia spine or acacia thorn, those white ones that you see, are quite brittle. You can break those easily with your finger. As you run over them in the tire, they'll just get crushed. But those sicklebush spines will go straight through a reinforced tire if need be. So a lot of these animals have also got sort of specially adapted teeth. So we were talking about the Gemsbok a lot because we've seen them, but they also have particularly well adapted teeth to be able to deal with some of the more coarser vegetation. Because remember, the vegetation has to protect itself as well, just as much as the animals do out in these dry areas. So a lot of the grasses and the different vegetation out there has this very fibrous, what's the best word for it? It's fibrous slash solid consistency. And if you require the ability to grind up food for a lot of your life, then it's important that your teeth can handle that tougher produce. So they have quite broad and high-crowned molars in the Gemsbok, and that's specifically designed to withstand the wear and tear caused by those desert grasses. A wide row of incisors as well, which allow them to crop that coarse grass down very close to the ground, because generally the lower down you can get the grass, the more nutritious it is. And actually, interestingly, of all of the large herbivores that we have out here, the Gemsbok has one of the narrowest muzzles as well, which in effect means that they can get closer to the ground and get into little nooks and crannies where young shoots are springing up, and it allows them to get the best quality food in what could otherwise be a very harsh environment. Impalas have a similar adaptation, the way that they have that split upper lip, and that enables the lips to get very, very close to the ground and pick up those new produce or new growth, certainly. Well, that's very kind of you to say so, Gio. It's been a treat to actually be here. So I would obviously much prefer to be bumbling around the reserve in one of the vehicles and getting up close and personal. This is almost this is a strange way of doing it for me, certainly, but it's been lovely to watch the activity at the waterhole, and I will be doing this again tomorrow. So I will be back on from 9:30 to 12:30 tomorrow again. And I'm sure we'll also have another look at the Djuma cam. I have been keeping an eye on the Djuma dam cam. There hasn't been much happening in comparison to here. Although I did, just to update everybody, our little brown hooded parrot family are going strong. I did see them a little bit earlier. But hopefully we'll get a bit more activity. I mean, I was hoping Marips would turn up, because if he's still loitering in that big Jackleberry on Gowrie Cutline Central, that's only about probably no more than 500 metres from the dam. So if we're lucky, perhaps it might be worth keeping an eye on the dam cam all day today, and maybe Marips comes for a bit of a drink. I'm not sure how much water there is still in the Muluwati. I imagine still quite a lot, so you may not have to venture so far. But he will require water after eating that young kudu that he caught. There's so much activity here. I've never known a waterhole to have such a constant influx of animals for hours and hours on end. And it's just because of these harsh conditions that you don't find out in the Lowveld, where I spent the majority of my career. The sort of place you don't really need to do game drives out in these areas. You just go and park off next to a waterhole, particularly in the drier winter months, and wait for the animals to come to you. I just wonder what else we've missed here, panning around, and it's sometimes difficult to discern the smaller animals. I'm sure there have been some jackals and things around, but they just disappear in the soil and the rocks. And unless you happen to pick up the movement, it makes it very, very difficult to locate. Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're almost out of time for Escape to Nature this morning. But we will, of course, the team will be out this afternoon for the sunset safari from 2:30 Central Africa time. I'm sure everyone's keen to catch up with Marips, and I know Columba will Steve as well, which makes me a little bit jealous, I'm not going to lie. But it has been lovely for me to spend some time at Koyu Waterhole, and I'm looking forward to doing the same again tomorrow. So for all of you watching, thank you so much for your questions and your comments. I did go back and try and find out how much water an elephant's trunk can hold, and I'm still not confident enough to give you an answer. A lot of conflicting views, but I've seen them take out a bucket of water in seconds, so I'm still reckoning around about 20 litres, but I'll see what I can find for you. But wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your day, and do join us this afternoon, and I will catch up with you tomorrow from the dam cams. But have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us.
Nach dem zweiten Gin Tonic.